Have you ever felt strangely apathetic, even when everything seems fine? Have you noticed a quiet sadness creeping in for no clear reason? A sense of emptiness that grows with each passing day? Many people interpret this state as emotional weakness, unexplained depression, or even ingratitude, as if you're wrong for not feeling happy in a life that looks functional from the outside. But what if the problem isn't inside you? What if it's the world around you that's making you sick? On the surface, modern society looks like a triumph of efficiency. Entire cities have been designed to save time, increase productivity, and connect millions of people. But somewhere in the process of building the modern world, something essential was left behind. Beauty. Not beauty as a luxury, not beauty as decoration, but beauty as a deep psychological need. Philosopher Alain de Botton argues that we're living through a kind of chronic aesthetic hunger. According to him, our environments haven't simply stopped being beautiful. They've become actively hostile to human sensitivity. Think about it. Spending your days surrounded by gray walls, cold corridors, artificial lighting, endless repeated shapes that communicate nothing. Imagine living in neighborhoods where nothing points to nature, history, art, or meaning. No symbols, no soul, no reminder that life is more than work and survival. This ugliness isn't neutral. It communicates, it oppresses, it dehumanizes, and most frighteningly, it starts to feel normal. It makes us sick. According to de Botton, architecture doesn't just shape cities, it shapes people. The spaces we spend time in quietly influence the way we think, the way we feel, and even the way we experience life. And when we spend too long in environments devoid of beauty, our minds begin to reflect that same emptiness. Ugly environments create ugly mental states. This isn't about being dramatic. It isn't about being fussy or too sensitive. It's a natural response to a world that has stopped designing spaces with the human soul in mind. And what makes this even more disturbing is that most people don't even realize it's happening. Because ugliness has become normal. We've been conditioned to believe that caring about aesthetics is shallow, that design is vanity, that beauty is optional, something extra, something unnecessary. But the truth is the opposite. Beauty is not superficial, it's psychological. And when it disappears, we don't just lose something nice to look at. We lose something our minds actually need. Its absence hurts, and that wound is showing up everywhere. In silent epidemics of anxiety, depression, apathy, and emotional disconnection. In this video, we're going to explore how the modern environment, from cities to homes, from offices to public spaces, is slowly breaking the human mind. Not through obvious violence, but through monotony, through the absence of symbolism, through the deliberate removal of everything that makes a space feel truly human. And more importantly, we'll explore how to resist, how to reconnect with beauty on purpose, and use that reconnection as an antidote to the psychological collapse imposed by a functional but aesthetically sterile world. This isn't just a video about architecture. It's a video about emotional survival in a world that has lost its visual soul. Because maybe what's depressing you isn't your mind. Maybe it's the place your mind is being forced to live. For millions of years, the human brain evolved inside nature. Trees, flowing water, soft shifts in sunlight, organic textures, the sound of wind, the smell of wet earth. this was the backdrop our minds were shaped within. Nature didn't just provide shelter. It stimulated, calmed, guided, and stabilized the human nervous system. But today, most people spend their lives surrounded by concrete, glass, noise, and constant artificial light. And what looks like modern living is often something else, a quiet form of sensory deprivation. Our nervous system depends on certain stimuli to function properly. Natural light, for example, regulates our circadian rhythm, a biological cycle that shapes sleep, mood, mental clarity, and emotional stability. But in closed environments, fluorescent lighting, and daily life with no sky, no greenery, and no variation disrupt that rhythm. The body keeps functioning, but the mind begins to weaken. The Barton's argument is simple but terrifying. When we eliminate beauty from our environments, we aren't just changing our cities, we're attacking ourselves. A fundamental psychological need. In the architecture of happiness, Alain de Botton writes that we are, for better or worse, different people in different places. In other words, physical space doesn't just affect what we see, it affects who we become. And it's not an exaggeration to say that living in ugly, lifeless environments gradually makes us more tired, more numb, and more empty. Because when beauty disappears, something strange happens inside the mind. We don't relax. We tense up. The deprivation of beauty creates a quiet, continuous state of alertness. When the brain is exposed to sterile, monotonous environments, it often interprets the absence of positive stimuli as a form of danger. Not obvious danger, but emotional threat. So what builds up is a background anxiety, a constant internal tension that you rarely notice consciously, but it accumulates over days, weeks, even years. It's like living in a place that subtly communicates all day, every day. You don't belong here. You are not important. But beauty, contrary to what we've been taught, isn't decoration. Beauty is regulation. A sunset, a tree moving in the wind, a meaningful piece of art. These aren't nice extras. They trigger real biochemical reactions. Dopamine rises, cortisol drops, and areas of the brain linked to empathy, pleasure, and contemplation become active. So when those stimuli are missing continuously, our inner life becomes poorer. And slowly, we start feeling like machines, broken machines, inside a system that demands productivity while denying vitality. And aesthetic deprivation does something else too. It steals our imagination. Ugly, repetitive, symbolically empty environments keep the mind trapped in an operational state, where everything is urgent, functional, and immediate. You lose the internal space needed to reflect, to dream, to create. Because how can we cultivate elevated thoughts in places that evoke nothing? How can we search for meaning in a life that looks visually empty? And the most alarming part is this. The more time you spend in these environments, the more you adjust to them. Ugliness becomes normal. Apathy becomes routine. And eventually, you stop noticing that you're not really living. You're just surviving. Not because you're weak, but because your environment was never designed to support you as a human being. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into this architectural collapse, exploring how modern spaces have been shaped to maximize productivity, and why a design philosophy centered on profit and efficiency is quietly turning people into emotionally stunted beings. If this is resonating with you, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The aesthetics of modern environments didn't appear by accident. They were built with a very clear purpose: to maximize efficiency. Offices, corporate buildings, schools, and even hospitals were designed like production systems, not like spaces made for human beings. Straight lines, neutral tones, constant white lighting, functional furniture, no personality. Everything was designed for one goal: to keep bodies moving and keep minds locked onto tasks. But by removing everything that could distract the individual, they also removed what nourished the person from within. This logic, inherited from the Industrial Revolution and reinforced by modern corporate culture, treats human beings like resources. And like any resource, their value is measured by one thing only: output. In this context, the environment stops being a place for emotional expression, reflection, or meaning, and becomes an extension of the production line. Identical cubicles, gray walls, oppressive silence, broken only by keyboards, notifications, and deadlines. This is the habitat of millions of people across the world. A habitat designed not to inspire, but to control. The problem is, the human mind doesn't function well under sensory oppression. When someone is continuously exposed to sterile spaces, the mind enters a kind of containment mode. Thought becomes purely utilitarian. Emotion gets suppressed. Creativity starts to shrink. And over time, the individual disconnects, not only from the space, but from themselves. Productivity might increase for a while, days, even weeks, but slowly, the soul begins to fade. De Botton points out that one of the greatest failures of modern architecture was abandoning the belief that environments should reflect who we are and who we want to become. Instead, they began reflecting only efficiency, control, and profit. As he writes, the belief in the importance of architecture comes from one simple truth: we are, for better or worse, different people in different places. In other words, the spaces we live in shape the version of ourselves that shows up there. And when we spend our lives inside places designed like machines, we slowly start becoming machine-like too. Designed solely to turn human beings into productive cogs, we inevitably become cogs, worn out, alienated, and easily replaceable. The so-called aesthetics of maximum productivity also imposes something deeper than efficiency: uniformity. Corporate environments rarely allow personal expression. A family photo on the desk is seen as a distraction. Bright colors are treated as childish or unprofessional. Art, cultural identity, spiritual symbols, anything with meaning, is quietly removed in the name of neutrality. But what presents itself as neutral is not neutral at all. It's a deliberate erasure of human subjectivity. It is, in many ways, the architecture of obedience. And there's another layer to this. This aesthetic creates an illusion of order while masking internal chaos. From the outside, everything looks clean, organized, and standardized. But inside those buildings, people are fighting silent crises: anxiety, depression, burnout, depersonalization. Many people who spend years in sterile environments describe the same feeling: that their life has slowly become colorless, soulless, meaningless. And it's not a coincidence. Physical space is shaping the collective emotional state, quietly, constantly, while nobody talks about it. But the productivity aesthetic doesn't stop at work. It follows us home. Excessive minimalism, palettes of gray, white, and beige. Generic mass-produced furniture. Design trends that promise cleanliness and functionality, but often deliver coldness. Slowly, without noticing, Many people turn their homes into extensions of corporate environments, impersonal, emotionally flat, silently oppressive. But a home is supposed to be a sanctuary, not a workplace. And this disconnection between environment and emotion isn't just uncomfortable, it becomes pathological. Because when we live in spaces that don't reflect our stories, our feelings, or our aspirations, we start believing those things don't matter. The psyche adapts to the void, as if it's normal to live without color, without poetry, without meaning. But there is something even more dangerous than impersonal functionality. And that's what we'll explore next: digital sensory overload. Because while our physical spaces have been emptied of symbolic stimulation, our minds are being bombarded day and night with endless digital stimulation, notifications, content, noise, comparison. And this contrast between sterile physical spaces and chaotic virtual excess is creating an unsustainable tension inside the modern mind. If physical environments have been reduced to neutral, silent boxes, the digital universe has taken the opposite path. It has become a space of extreme, constant, fragmented stimulation. And this combination is toxic. During the day, the individual moves through dead visual spaces, cold offices, colorless corridors, soulless buildings. And in the few moments when they are not producing, they plunge into a sea of frantic digital noise, a stream of stimuli that captures, kidnaps, and exhausts attention. We live in the era of digital overstimulation: notifications, banners, short videos, instant messages, endless feeds. Every second of your attention is being contested by algorithms refined for one purpose: to generate compulsion. And the brain, unable to process this endless torrent, enters a state of permanent alert, a chronic stress that is mostly invisible, but deeply destructive. What makes this even worse is that this stimulation is not the kind that nourishes the mind. It's not like a natural landscape. It's not like silence. It's not like art. Instead, it fragments experience. You no longer contemplate. You consume, in pieces, jumping from stimulus to stimulus with no time to process, integrate, or reflect. The result is predictable. Attention collapses, depth disappears, and the mind becomes increasingly restless, anxious, and superficial, constantly active but rarely fulfilled. In The Architecture of Happiness, de Botton suggests that physical spaces have the power to calm us, to reconnect us with deeper parts of ourselves. A beautiful space can function like a mirror, reflecting who we are, but also like a guide, helping us remember ourselves when the world tries to fragment us. But today, most of our conscious life isn't spent in those reconnection spaces. It's spent inside screens, which reinforce dissociation. And there's another factor that makes this worse. Digital stimulation is cheap and immediate. To experience a real landscape requires presence, time, silence, stillness. But the pleasure of the feed is instant, easy, infinite. So gradually, the brain starts preferring the quick reward. But it comes at a cost: the loss of contemplation. And contemplation is not optional. It is essential to mental health. Contemplation is what allows us to feel beauty. And without beauty, there is no meaning. This creates a cruel paradox. We live in environments that are physically numbing and digitally overwhelming. The real world makes us sick through absence. The virtual world makes us sick through excess. And caught between these two extremes, we lose the ability to recognize what's harming us. The human soul ends up without space, without pause, without refuge. And when the buildings we live in and work in begin to copy digital logic, impersonal lines, reflective surfaces, no symbols, no warmth, no meaning, the process of dehumanization becomes complete. Because what's happening to you is not simply fatigue or lack of focus. It's something deeper, a psychological collapse. A psychological collapse. Not because we are weak, but because we are living inside environments that were never designed to sustain the complexity of being human. And there's an even deeper component to this whole equation. Something that explains why even in silence, even without digital stimulation, certain places still make us feel empty, insignificant, or depressed. It comes down to one thing: dehumanized architecture. Spaces that, through their very structure, quietly communicate. You are just another unit in a system, a number, a date point, a cog. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. How modern architecture, by prioritizing function and eliminating symbolism, has produced buildings that resemble emotional prisons, more than spaces for human coexistence. Architecture should be an extension of the human soul, a physical language that expresses values, emotions, memory, history, and collective identity. But what we see in many major cities today is almost the complete opposite. Buildings that rise like hostile fortresses, housing complexes repeated like mass-produced copies of a generic model, streets without trees, no benches, no pauses, no spaces designed for presence, identical shops with cold displays, subway stations that feel less like public spaces and more like underground shelters. And the most disturbing part is this: none of it happened by accident. This was not a mistake. It was choice. It was design. Dehumanized architecture is the direct product of modern logic, a logic that prioritizes cost, function, and efficiency over symbolism, meaning, or emotional nourishment. In The Architecture of Happiness, de Botton suggests that many cities today reflect only our technical ability, but not our existential depth. And when architecture stops telling stories, it stops reminding us who we are. Because when the space around you becomes indifferent to your existence, you begin to feel invisible. And that indifference has deep psychological effects. Imagine living inside a building that looks like a concrete box. No balconies, no details, no warmth, no color, every floor identical, every apartment a repetition of the last, every window framing the same gray world. What does a space like this communicate, day after day, to the people forced to inhabit it? It communicates: you do not matter. Your individuality is irrelevant. You are just another body to be stored. These environments aren't only ugly, they are oppressive. They scream impersonality. They scream silence. And when human beings live inside these spaces for long enough, they internalize the message. They begin to believe their presence is insignificant, that they have nothing unique to offer, that their suffering doesn't count. Because even the building they live in seems indifferent to whether they exist at all. But not all is lost. It is still possible to resist. It is still possible to reclaim beauty, meaning, and humanity in the spaces we inhabit. And it begins with small, but conscious actions. In the next part, we'll explore practical and profound ways to recreate environments that nourish the mind, even inside a society that constantly tries to erase beauty. Because even when surrounded by functional ugliness, we can still claim the right to aesthetics as a form of healing and reconnection. In the face of this devastating reality, where environments silently make us ill, where architecture has lost its soul, and where beauty has been treated as a frivolous luxury, one question remains unavoidable. What can we do? How do we psychologically survive in a world that no longer offers emotional shelter? The answer is subtle, but powerful. We must deliberately reclaim the right to beauty, not as decoration, not as vanity, but as an act of resistance. Because contrary to what the system has taught us, caring about the environment we live in is not a whim. It is psychological survival. Every detail matters. Every visual element around you has the power to shape your mood, your thoughts, and even your behavior. So when you introduce beauty into your life, when you consciously choose what you see, what you touch, what surrounds you, you're making a statement. You're telling the world, my mind matters, my well-being matters. I'm not just a production machine. Beauty can return through simple but meaningful choices. Live plants in your workspace, natural light whenever possible, colors that soften the nervous system, textures that remind you of nature, pictures, objects with history, symbols that connect you to your journey or your spirituality. The size of the space doesn't matter. What matters is the intention, the gesture, the quiet affirmation that the environment should serve the psyche, not just productivity. The button reminds us that a home isn't only a place to sleep. It is a place that helps us remember who we are. So if the space you inhabit is impersonal, sterile, generic, what kind of memory is it offering you? Probably none. And that's why it becomes essential to build, even on a micro scale, refugees inside the grey jungle we've been placed in. Micro sanctuaries, corners of beauty, spaces where you can breathe, where you can return to silence, where you can reflect, where you can remember. And if we cannot transform everything, we can still transform something. We can still reclaim parts. A corner of the house, a hallway lined with pictures that speak to your soul, a shelf filled with books that awaken memory, a vase of flowers in the bathroom, a chair placed exactly where the morning sun lands. Small gestures that become powerful armor against the collective void. But perhaps the most important thing to understand is this. Being affected by ugly environments is not weakness. It is a sign of sanity. When a building oppresses you, when an office drains you, when an entire neighborhood feels cold, abandoned, and lifeless, you're not being too sensitive. You're having a perfectly human response to a dehumanized environment. And simply recognizing that is already the first step toward healing. So reclaiming beauty becomes a radical act, a quiet rebellion, a silent challenge to the system, a non-verbal scream that says, I am more than function. I am more than efficiency. I am a human being, and I need beauty to continue being one. Because caring for your environment is caring for your mind. And in a brutally functional world, where everything is gray, practical, repetitive, this care becomes a form of intimate revolution. Now that you've seen how the environment silently shapes your mind, tell me, what is the ugliest place you've ever lived or worked? And how did it affect you? Leave it in the comments. And if this video spoke to you, share it. Someone you know might be suffering without understanding why. This is only the beginning. The next video continues this journey. If you want to understand even more deeply, the invisible forces shaping your inner life. Don't stop here. The next episode is essential. See you there.